Thank you. Thank you to the organizers for this wonderful conference. I think it's very unique. I learned a lot from the first day from the practitioners in the room here. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about generative AI in equilibrium. This is joint work with my former classmate, Sam, who's now at Stanford. And let's get into it. So, I probably don't need to tell you generative AI is a transformative technology, and it has the potential to change the economics of production. And we already have lots of growing research that generative AI is improving productivity and internal processes. Obviously, you yourselves have probably used generative AI for writing, for coding, searching for additional information. And all of that is a really, really important part of what generative AI does. But actually, in this particular paper, we want to go a little bit further into the future and think about what is going to happen when there are broader impacts on consumer-facing products and market equilibrium. We're thinking about settings where Gen AI is actually going to directly affect the products that are being sold. And when we do that, we can open up to thinking about a lot of additional questions like firm entry and exit, potentially, things like market competition and actual market concentration, and competition. Thinking about the quality and variety of the goods that we will have available in a particular market, and things like search and actual sales. And so the goal of this paper is to study the causal effect of the introduction of Gen AI technology on market equilibrium. So I want to get more specific with this. So thinking about kind of all of the players and agents in a particular market, for consumers, the natural question is, when we're thinking about products, is Gen AI products valuable to consumers? Do they actually buy them? That's very dependent on the quality of those products. For firms that are generating these products, how will it affect competition? Obviously, it's going to lower your cost of production, but it might also lower the cost of production of your competitors. And so competition is going to be affected, and we're going to be thinking about who adopts Gen AI technology, who enters, who exits. And then we're going to do so in markets, but also in a particular online marketplace here. And so for platforms, they're contending with this question of how Gen AI is going to affect the distribution of products available on their platform. So we're interested in where does Gen AI sit in the space of vertical differentiation and horizontal differentiation. So think about quality and also variety of goods. Not in this presentation, but something we're also thinking about is the policy surrounding Gen AI. Obviously, whether to actually introduce it or not, how to disclose it, how to price it. Okay, so this paper has a theoretical part, but that's not for today's presentation. Today's presentation, I want to actually show you some data on a platform that actually has gone through this process. The empirical setting we're thinking about is going to be a major stock images platform. And I'm going to tell you what that actually means in the next slide. But this particular platform, around 13 months ago, allowed generative AI content on some of its marketplaces, but not all of them. And that's going to allow us to think about what the effect of Gen AI is. We're going to use a very standard statistical technique, differences in difference, in order to measure the actual effect that Gen AI has on this particular market. And I'm going to talk to you about why that's going to be a credible measure in terms of the control group that we have. Okay, so let's get into what this marketplace is. Stock images is a really big market, 6 billion globally. And we're looking at a particularly large player in that marketplace. Normally at this point, I would say we're not direct consumers in this market, but with so many practitioners and marketers in the room, you might be one of the buyers in this market. But the buyers we're thinking about are journalists, website designers, displays advertisers, etc. So if I want to write an article about Tesla, I might go on this marketplace and search for images of Teslas. So what the, how do I control it out? Yeah. Okay. So what the buyer is doing on this market is searching through a large number of potential images of Teslas, trying to find what's appropriate for their particular article or ad copy. And And so what's important with Gen AI is it's going to increase the product variety available to them. But it might increase congestion to the extent that the quality of these images are not good. On the firm side, we have authors. These are going to be photographers, graphic artists, and with the introduction of Gen AI, they're going to be prompt engineers as well. These firms create those images, they choose some quality and variety of products to produce, and Gen AI here is reducing the cost of productions, but it might be only for certain levels of quality. And then, of course, for the platform's perspective, the reason they might allow Gen AI is to increase product variety, and it remains to be seen whether that's going to be successful. And on this particular platform, pricing is also determined by the platform. That's going to be good for us in terms of allowing us to focus on other things. Normally, we think of market equilibrium being affected by pricing. Another really nice thing about this particular marketplace is, and if you're doing research on Gen AI, it's very difficult to credibly label something as Gen AI or not Gen AI. So in this marketplace, the actual platform themselves invests in generative AI technologies, and so they know, they actually provide the tools for these firms to actually produce Gen AI or non-Gen AI images. So they actually have a good idea of what is and what isn't. And so while I don't think it's foolproof, this kind of labeling, it's probably one of the best ones we have available currently. Okay, so there's a literature in generative AI. As I mentioned, where we really sit is instead of thinking about productivity increases, we're thinking about a situation where Gen AI is directly affecting products. So this is kind of looking towards the future when creative goods like movies, novels, music, potentially going to be Gen AI produced. Okay, so let me talk about identification, which is just to say we want to, as academics, measure things correctly, and I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. The reason it's difficult is we're thinking about market equilibrium, and lots of things go into an equilibrium. Let me highlight three kind of extreme examples that we're thinking of. We could have a situation where Gen AI leads to a market for lemons. So we have more variety, but this variety is low quality. And so Gen AI crowds out non-Gen AI products. You have a very high quality non-Gen AI product, but the market's swamped with these low quality imitators. And this would really emphasize the importance of search process for consumers. Another equilibrium that might eventuate is Gen AI might allow a particular firm to take the entire market. We've kind of seen that the introduction of all of this technology is driven by these big tech companies, right? And so it might actually entrench existing market power. So quality Gen AI products coming from the few capable firms might lead to higher market concentration and less competition. That's true, but you might say we've all got access to all of this Gen AI product, so it's actually quite democratized. That might actually be true. In that particular case, we have good Gen AI competition. With low barriers to entry, quality Gen AI products for everyone, which sounds great, but potentially, if everyone's using Gen AI, there might be less training data going forward. At least in the case of a few big firms, we might think there's still incentives for innovation. But in the case where everyone is using it and the benefits are very dispersed, we might not have that innovation going forward. And so we want to think about, at a market-by-market level, whether each of these kind of equilibrium might eventuate. And so our research question is, what's the causal effect of Gen AI on market equilibrium outcomes? Let me talk to you about some of the difficulties in isolating this. Gen AI, we can't just look at the data pre and post the introduction of Gen AI. The reason for this is Gen AI has coincided with tons of macroeconomic shocks that we're also concerned about, things like inflation, the Fed rate increases, tech layoffs, post-COVID adjustments, all of these are going at the same time. And so a pre-post comparison of what's happened to these markets isn't sufficient. Same if we just take a slice of time and compare markets that have Gen AI and don't have Gen AI, we're worried about the specifics of those markets affecting our results. Maybe a market is just different in some way that's unrelated to Gen AI. And so this motivates a comparison which thinks about time dimension and cross-sectional dimension between markets. And so we're going to use a very classic difference in difference methodology here to tease out exactly what is attributed to Gen AI and not attributed to things like inflation or specifics of a particular market. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about those markets where this platform allowed Gen AI and the ones that don't. So Tesla, this is an example of a control market where the platform did not allow Gen AI. So I already talked to you about what might a typical consumer in this market look like. You know, the artists are photographers, they're thinking about location, lighting, etc. An example of a treated market is anything that doesn't contain a brand image. So Tesla is a brand image, and the reason the platform doesn't allow Gen AI is because of legal concerns. If Gen AI creates a wonky-looking Tesla car, they're liable to be sued. And so if you want to write an article about road rage, prior to the introduction of Gen AI, this is what you might have seen. For the photographer, thinking about the production function process, they have to hire this actor, they have to find a location, they have to make sure it's the right time of day, choose a camera angle, and they're limited in how much they can modify this expose. When Gen AI was introduced on the treated markets like road rage, this is what they might have seen. Additional images, and you might have guessed, these are actually Gen AI images. And so you can decide for yourself whether you think this is a high quality image, an image you might use in an article about road rage. Just to keep harping on about, you know, the quality of Gen AI matters, let me show you a bunch of images, portraits of individuals that are on this platform. Any guesses as to what proportion of these images are Gen AI and non-Gen AI?
All of them?
All of them.
Yes, so you should be skeptical of rhetorical questions. These are all Gen AI images. And so I would say, at least personally, a few of these are a little bit uncanny, but the vast majority are quite good. And think about the film production process. The costs of a real photographer collecting these real images of people, you know, people who are conventionally attractive across a wide variety of races, in a wide variety of locations, it's just completely prohibitive for a traditional firm. And so Gen AI has the potential to really provide a very low cost to variety. And that's important when we think about market equilibrium. Let me get into some of the data. So we're going to collect data from markets on this platform. Right now we have around 193 markets. Whole bunch of authors and images. Around 25% of images we're going to be collecting on Gen AI. Some of the key statistics that we're focusing on are when it was published, whether it was Gen AI, obviously, whether it was sold. We have some noisy measure of whether it was sold. And an important part of this process is defining markets. We can actually be very flexible on defining markets. So Tesla is one market, road rage is one market. We're going to use the platform suggested keywords to define markets. So the images you see in the search results is a market. Other examples we've got up here are pickleball, bald eagle's nest, and for the control markets, it's anything containing a brand, Chanel, Costco, etc. And I'm going to focus on market month kind of observations. So we're thinking about the flow of images into this particular platform. Okay, let me show you some raw data. So on the left here, top panel, this is across time. This is our period of study. The solid line is when the platform announced Gen AI. Implementation took a little bit of time, and so the dotted line is where the images actually flowed onto the platform, the Gen AI images. Red is the markets that allowed Gen AI, blue is the markets that didn't. And so you can see, in terms of images published, we see a massive increase from those markets that allowed Gen AI. In terms of the authors, we also see a ton of unique authors each month compared to what we saw before. And coincidentally, also with sales. And this is really important. Like, we would expect there would be a lot more production on these markets, but it's not obvious consumers would want to buy these products. I should also note, on this platform, to consumers, whether it's a Gen AI product or not is clearly labeled, and they can sort on it. You might be wondering, these are just, the red line is markets that allow Gen AI, but is it actually Gen AI products that is driving the increase? The answer is yes. So on the right panel, I'm splitting that red line into Gen AI products and non-Gen AI products. All of this increase is effectively coming from Gen AI products. So this is just the raw data. Let me delve into some of the kind of actual statistical outputs. We're going to use the difference in difference technique. Here, we're effectively just making sure we're measuring what we're seeing in the raw data correctly, and it isn't due to statistical noise, for example. We're going to be focusing on a particular coefficient here. Sorry, I keep doing that. This coefficient. So as you probably saw on the graphs, the implementation took some time, so we're going to be focusing on the latter part of the period and comparing that to the pre-period before Gen AI was even a thing. These are the results. I don't want to go through all of these numbers in this presentation. Let me just highlight some of the overview, and I'll get into some of the details. So variety increases. The number of images available to consumers vastly increases. Consumers do actually buy Gen AI images on these platforms. You saw some of them were pretty good, at least to me. There's tons of entry by Gen AI firms, and we do see some exit by non-Gen AI firms. So like for firms that aren't adopting this technology, they're looking at the marketplace and they're deciding, I'm not going to produce anymore because it looks like the market is swamped. And of course, we can measure market concentration with some of the common measures that are out there, and we see that it decreases sizably. So this is potentially good for competition. We have robust competition occurring. Okay. What is also common when we do a diff and diff is to show you an event study. This is just a difference of the raw data that I showed you, but it will be fun to talk through this particular specification. So this is going back to the number of images published. So here we're thinking about the variety. We see that increase in the pre-period. The difference between our treat and the control are pretty stable in the sense that they move together, they were on the same trend, and after the introduction of Gen AI, we see that the markets with Gen AI have high variety. All of this increase is coming from Gen AI content, but we don't see, at least when we think about all of the markets, there isn't a decrease in non-Gen AI content. We haven't seen them exit just yet when we're thinking about overall. I'm going to show you market heterogeneity results in a little bit. But of course, the variety is great. Is it valuable to consumers? With the overview, I showed you that it does seem like that's happening. Overall, sales are increasing, but is this increasing in Gen AI products? If we split that up by Gen AI and non-Gen AI, we do see, yes, all of the sales increase is coming from Gen AI products. And then just one last event study graph for entry and exit. We see a lot of entry. It is almost all from Gen AI firms. And in fact, we see some exit by traditional content creators. Okay, so that was the kind of we aggregated all the markets together that were Gen AI, all the markets together that were non-Gen AI. But to think about the potential mechanisms, I want to break down our sample into a few different splits. We're going to split these markets based on two things: market size, so pre-period market size, and pre-period Herfindahl index. So you might have encountered Herfindahl-Hirschman index before. It's just a way to measure market concentration. 0 is perfect competition. There's infinite firms in the market. 10,000 is the max that this index takes. That's what happens when a monopoly is in the market, gets all of the market share. 1,000 is something like 10 equal firms. The reason I want to do this by market size in this particular index is think about what markets are Gen AI most impactful in. Okay, so these are the same results you saw, but in graph form. So the leftmost image I've got here is the variety, the number of images. The gray bar is the overall number of images, and then the blue bar is the number of non-Gen AI images. The orange bar is the number of Gen AI images. And this is, again, comparing pre-period with the post-period and control and treated. So let me interpret this for you. When we're thinking about the smaller markets, which is the below median markets, these are probably markets that had a pretty high barrier to entry, or a very low demand, or some combination of the two. Whereas high markets, the large markets, are things that people are always searching for. So Tesla might be one of those markets that are large. It turns out that the exit of non-GAI is concentrated in small markets. So if there's a really big market and Gen AI enters, at least for now, we don't see the non-Gen AI firms exit. But if you're working in a very small market, where previously it's niche in some cases, you're actually exiting when Gen AI is entering. We see an increase in competition across the board, but it's naturally going to be the case that for the smaller markets, they were previously less competitive, and the competition increases quite dramatically, more dramatically than the large markets when Gen AI enters. A similar split is splitting by this actual market concentration measure. And again, it's flipped here, but high HHI markets are markets that are niche and have high barriers to entry, while the small markets are the mass market situations. So here we're comparing the two blue bars. What we're seeing here is that in terms of variety and number of images, we do see non-Gen AI production fall for those highly concentrated markets. So Gen AI is entering into these niche markets, and the non-Gen AI firms are not only exiting, the ones that do stay significantly reduce their production. And so taking these two together, it looks like Gen AI really excels at entry into niche markets and improves competition in those markets dramatically. This is potentially a good or a bad thing. It's not clear because it crowds out the incentives for non-Gen AI firms to operate in these niche markets. And so let me end with an example of what might be a niche market that's highly concentrated and also has a very small market size. So we looked in the data, and it turns out one such market are images of bald eagles' nests. And so obviously you can imagine only a few select photographers might be able to capture real images of something like this. There's not probably that much demand for this type of images. And what we're seeing post introduction of Gen AI is tons of images like this. Initially, I wasn't sure this was a Gen AI image, but I've been told by some of my colleagues who follow these bald eagle nest cams that are on the internet that they never have this many chicks. So this is definitely Gen AI. And so you're thinking it's great. We have, as consumers, we have these images available to us. We can have a family of 5 chicks here, tell the story we want with this particular image. But this is also, in these markets, the real kind of natural life photographers are exiting this market. And it might be the case going forward that we no longer have real images of bald eagles' nests. And wouldn't that be sad? Okay, so I want to end. Gen AI can directly impact product markets, not just improve productivity. And this is a huge area of research that's untapped, with unknown implications for market equilibrium. We showed that the introduction of Gen AI causally increases variety in the market, leads to entry of Gen AI phones, some exit of Gen AI phones, particularly in niche markets. Consumers do, in fact, buy these images, and that's important, and it improves competition and market concentration. But where we take those conclusions really depends on what you think might happen to the incentives for producing real images. And this is still in progress, and so happy to talk to each and every one of you and get your thoughts. As particularly for the practitioners in the room, if you are interested in partnering up or whatnot, or talking about our particular research, my email is up there. I'd love to talk. All right, thank you.